Someone I cherish more than my life is pregnant. I'm divorcing you. I won't accept a refusal, so pack your bags and leave. That's what my husband, who had casually gone on a trip and returned home, told me while I was overwhelmed with caring for my bedridden mother-in-law at her house. I wondered what he intended to do with his bedridden mother since he had never once helped with her care. When I asked, he said, "Isn't it obvious? You're used to it, so you should just keep taking care of her. It won't cost anything for care, and it's a great idea, right?" While I was exhausted from caring for my mother-in-law, my husband was having an affair with a younger woman and even got her pregnant. My anger reached its peak, and then came disbelief. My husband really knows nothing about running a household. You really don't know anything, do you? Me taking care of your mother? Are you serious? That's impossible for me. Because your mother is. He was shocked and deeply disappointed by the truth that followed. I met my husband during the prime time for marriage and we got married. It wasn't like we were thinking about marriage from the start, but as the conversation turned towards marriage, I started considering marrying him. When we visited his parents, I felt a dislike for his mother due to her cold attitude towards me. Since then, my relationship with my mother-in-law has been rather poor. However, there were no typical mother-in-law and daughter-in-law battles since I was consciously keeping my distance, due to her always emitting a "stay away from me" aura. Before meeting her, my husband told me she was a very cool person. She was a strong woman who had raised 2 children on her own, but in reality, her attitude was distinctly cold towards me. Thus, my relationship with my mother-in-law didn't develop over time. She didn't particularly say or do anything unpleasant to me. However, the unapproachable atmosphere remained. After my only daughter got into her desired university, I felt a sense of accomplishment as a mother. I thought my daughter would commute from home, but she wanted to be independent and move out for university. I was a bit sad, but I respected her wishes and allowed her to live alone. After she left, I felt a sense of loss as if my role as a mother was over, but until then, I had prioritized parenting over spending time with my husband. Now, I thought it was time to focus on our relationship, just when my mother-in-law had an accident. She fell and broke a bone and needed care for a while. My husband asked me to move in with his parents to help. Actually, I had been working full-time until I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. But, not wanting my child to feel lonely, I quit my job after giving birth. Once she started school, I began working part-time, then skillfully moved back into full-time employment. However, my husband wanted me to quit my job to take care of his mother. Honestly, I didn't get along well with her, but she had always been kind to my daughter and helped her a lot. She even came to her school events, so I felt grateful. So, I reluctantly agreed to his suggestion as a way of repaying her, thinking it was one option. But once I started living with my in-laws and caring for my mother-in-law, it was much harder than I imagined. Since she was mostly bedridden, dealing with her excretion was especially difficult. I had to do it because my husband, her son, probably wouldn't want to see it. And even though a caregiver came once a week, it seemed too infrequent for taking a shower. At first, my husband was very cooperative, wanting to repay his mother for raising him, but the heavy labor was far beyond his expectations, and he escaped to his busy work, leaving me to handle everything alone. I ended up taking care of her by myself and even hurt my back while helping her transfer to her wheelchair. But my husband, busy with work, didn't offer to help. I also had to accompany her to doctor's appointments. Our car wasn't equipped for a wheelchair, so helping her get in and out added to my back and knee pain. If only she had said a word of thanks, but her cold remarks didn't change even after I was the only one taking care of her. I felt lost about whether I could continue like this. When it was decided that my husband and I would move in with his parents to take care of his mother, his sister, Susan, said she would help occasionally. But in reality, she just offered words of encouragement like "keep it up," without actually helping. My sister-in-law, Susan, is married and lives a bit away from our in-laws' house. I understand that she can't come often, but when she does visit, she starts criticizing the way I care for our mother-in-law. Hey, you shouldn't do that, it's pitiful for mom. Try to be more empathetic towards her. She complained that the meals I prepared were not to our mother-in-law's liking, or that the care bed should be placed in a sunnier spot. When setting up the care bed, I had considered our mother-in-law's preferences. I didn't want to be lectured by Susan, who wasn't even there at the time. When I mentioned this to my husband, he surprisingly sided with Susan. Actually, I've been thinking the same. You should listen more to what mom wants. Take better care of her. Feeling isolated by my husband's unexpected stance, I realized I had no one on my side and no one to help me in this situation. I couldn't rely on community support because I couldn't leave my mother-in-law alone. I felt helpless in this situation. Gradually, my husband started coming home later. At first, when we started living together, he said he was busy at work, but I thought he was just avoiding helping with the care. Recently, however, he started talking about business trips. Something unheard of in his department. I began to feel suspicious about his behavior. Then one day, he left his smartphone on the living room table and went to take a shower. He usually keeps it in his room, so why leave it out today? Could he be so busy that he forgot? As I thought this and approached, I saw the screen was still on. Despite feeling I shouldn't look, my curiosity got the better of me. The screen showed a reservation for a luxury hotel for 4 people. My mind raced. Maybe it's a family trip with my mother-in-law? Despite everything, I thought, maybe he's still considering us. I apologized to my husband for accidentally seeing his phone and broached the topic of the trip. Huh? Why would I go on a trip with you? Did you think you were included in those 4 people? He mocked me with a sarcastic laugh. When I asked who he was going with, he dodged the question and never gave a straight answer. 2 weeks later, without considering my feelings, he left for the trip. After a 3-day trip, he returned and shockingly said, "My important coworker is pregnant. So, we're getting divorced right away." I couldn't believe my ears. Why was he demanding a divorce just after returning from a trip? I couldn't understand at all. Pregnant? Are you cheating with your coworker? I don't need to explain everything. Just silently agree to the divorce. Despite my persistent questioning, he refused to explain, saying I didn't need to know and that I should just obey because he's been providing for me. I depended on his income because he asked me to quit my job to care for his mother. If we had cooperated as a couple, there would have been no need to rely solely on his income. To be told he's been providing for me. Enough, you're annoying. I'm leaving for my lover's place. Contact me when you're ready to divorce, all right? He left my in-laws' house as if escaping my questioning. Seemingly light-footed, as if he had anticipated this outcome. A few days later, I went to the bank after accompanying my mother-in-law to her doctor's appointment to withdraw living expenses. It seemed my husband had no intention of supporting us anymore, as the entire amount of his salary had already been withdrawn. It looked like he thought this would make me agree to the divorce faster. A month later, I contacted my husband to agree to the divorce and asked him to come to my in-laws' house with his lover. On the appointed day, surprisingly, Susan also showed up uninvited. She seemed very close to my husband's mistress and appeared to accept their relationship. When I told my husband I agreed to the divorce, he and his mistress hugged each other in joy. Sorry to ruin the moment, but there's still more to discuss. What about your mother? You can take care of her, can't you? You've got lots of experience with caregiving. It's only natural for the experienced one to do it, right? That's impossible. Your mother is going to a facility. She'll receive professional care, and I'd just be in the way as an amateur, wouldn't I? Then, Susan, who had been silent until now, suddenly interrupted the conversation between my husband and me. You're sending mom to a care facility? How could you be so cruel? That's right. It's obvious that staying in her familiar home is best. My husband added, his joy from earlier turning into rage as if he himself was plummeting into misery. He unleashed a tirade of accusations, calling me cold-hearted and merciless. Then, our mother-in-law appeared. I'm the one who decided to go to the facility.
What? Mom? Why are you standing?
My husband and Susan were genuinely shocked to see her, who had been bedridden and wheelchair-bound, standing and walking on her own. They were also surprised to see that my mother-in-law and I had developed a good relationship. In fact, our relationship had been strained and bad at the beginning of our lives together. There were times when my mother-in-law lashed out at me because she couldn't move freely, but things changed after a certain point when we opened up and reconciled. The turning point was her apology. As I silently cleaned up after an accident she had, she apologized for making me do such things. This led to her apologizing for her aloof attitude towards me since we first met. My mother-in-law had divorced due to issues with her previous daughter-in-law. She had always tried not to do the same things to me that she disliked, but the more she thought about it, the less she knew how to act, which led to her keeping her distance. Once the distance was established, it became even harder to know what to do. As she found herself in need of care, her guilt overflowed. But she didn't know how to express it and tearfully apologized. I felt the same way. I had given up on trying to close the gap with her, to understand each other. Once the misunderstanding cleared, my mother-in-law began to regularly thank me. I also started to empathize with her and explore what kind of environment would be best for her care. In the process, she began showing interest in everything and even expressed a desire to try physiotherapy. A doctor referred us to a specialist, and she began to show signs of recovery with each visit. Now, she could walk short distances without a cane. The money for the care facility will come from selling the house and my savings. There won't be any money left for you too. My husband and Susan were outraged by this news they were hearing for the first time. My husband demanded to know why I didn't stop our mother-in-law's reckless decision. However, I knew all about what she had decided. Rather, she made the decision because she was pained by my husband's attitude towards me. Seeing that he didn't help with the caregiving and left everything to me, she initially looked for options she could manage on her own. Although bedridden, she could use her smartphone and had been searching with it. After we reconciled, she shared everything about her future plans with me. She had no intention of leaving any money for my husband and Susan. So, I suggested finding a comfortable facility, and I joined in the search. We found a vacancy in a luxurious nursing home within her budget. We visited, did a trial day, and she loved it, so she quickly signed the contract.
What the heck are you doing? If we let this woman take care of her, we can save a ton of money, my husband exclaimed.
Yeah, rethink this, Mom. Spending money on a nursing home is a waste, Susan chimed in. My mother-in-law glared at them fiercely.
I don't want to leave a single penny for you too. That's why I chose a luxurious nursing home. It's none of your business how I spend my money.
Her forceful voice silenced them, who had been loudly protesting until then. Realizing there was no inheritance, my husband and Susan were in shock. Their earlier aggressiveness gone. The mistress, contrary to what I expected, didn't seem too concerned about the lack of inheritance. She told my husband, "It's okay about the inheritance, as long as you marry me, I'll be happy." And then turned to me, demanding assertively to sign and hand over the divorce papers quickly. I informed them that there was someone I wanted present before I submitted the divorce papers. My husband, his mistress, and Susan looked puzzled, but my husband, thinking he had the upper hand, told me to call this person quickly if it meant the divorce would be finalized. Just then, the doorbell rang at a perfect time, so I excused myself to greet the person. When I returned with them, the mistress's demeanor completely changed. Because I had brought her mother. Right after my husband suddenly demanded a divorce, and until the month when I agreed to it, I had hired a detective agency to investigate my husband and his mistress. The participants of the trip, which my husband stubbornly refused to disclose, included him, his mistress, Susan, and surprisingly, the mistress's mother. It seemed that the trip was also meant for the mistress's mother to meet my husband. During the trip, there was no mention of my mother-in-law's care. My husband had told her that his mother had passed away, thinking it would be troublesome if his affair partner knew there was a caregiver. He introduced Susan as a motherly figure in his life. But the lies didn't end there. He had kept quiet about being married and not yet divorced from me. After receiving the investigation results, I went to meet the mistress's mother and revealed everything to her. Even knowing the truth, seeing the people involved in person seemed to have blown her rationality away. The mistress's mother, red-faced with anger, shouted unreservedly at her daughter, my husband, and Susan. While she was furiously yelling, the recipients of her anger seemed confused by the rapidly changing situation. Susan was questioning my husband about why he did something that could be discovered. Then, my husband, taken aback by the unexpected alliance between me and Susan, we were not on good terms, started to justify himself, saying he couldn't have anticipated this. After a thorough scolding, the mistress's mother turned to me and my mother-in-law apologized for her daughter's role in the affair. She even promised to ensure her daughter would pay any amount of compensation I demanded. However, the mistress was disgruntled and complained about why she should pay. I'm not paying. I'm carrying his baby, after all, she said, refusing to pay because she was pregnant and claiming they had my consent for the relationship. I never acknowledged their relationship. I was just fed up with my selfish husband and wanted nothing more to do with him. In fact, during the investigation into my husband, a significant secret he had been keeping from me came to light.
Since you two are going to be married, why not have my ex-husband pay the compensation?
Oh, right.
We'll have joint assets once we're married,
the mistress said, clearly naive about such matters. I left her with her misunderstanding. But now was the crucial fact she probably didn't know.
Yeah, joint assets. If he has the means, he can pay, right? What? Your soon-to-be ex-husband has a considerable amount of debt, it seems. You're quite the gold digger, aren't you? What did you make him borrow money for?
My husband had no spare money for the mistress because he was contributing to our household expenses. Whether he didn't cut back on expenses because he feared the affair would be discovered, or it was just his vanity, I didn't know. He had apparently been financing the affair entirely through loans from multiple lenders and was now deeply in debt with late repayments, even resorting to dangerous sources. The mistress was unaware of the debt. She confronted my husband, listing several brand names and insisting she never asked for them, he had given them to her of his own accord. She blamed him for his self-indulgence and for dragging her into it. My husband had always been a bit of a show-off, often choosing things beyond his means, which had led to several arguments. The mistress, though quick to blame my husband, was no match for her own mother. After being scolded by her mother for enough already, she shrank back, surprised and silenced. The mistress's mother, after bowing deeply to me and my mother-in-law, forcefully dragged her daughter away and left. Outside, the mistress was still claiming she was right, but her mother wouldn't listen and pushed her into the car, driving off. A strange silence settled over the house. Left behind were me and my mother-in-law, and my husband and Susan, who looked incredibly uncomfortable and kept their heads down. My mother-in-law broke the silence with a sarcastic tone.
So, I'm supposedly dead now.
Her remark was dripping with irony. My husband and Susan desperately tried to make excuses. They claimed it just ended up that way and they never intended to say she was dead, or that the mistress had misunderstood it on her own. However, their excuses were quite feeble and didn't convince my mother-in-law.
I thought I raised you to live honestly. How did you end up like this?
Personally, I believe while living under their parents' roof, it's the parents' responsibility, but once they leave home, especially after getting married and having their own families, their character formation is up to them. My mother-in-law had no reason to feel responsible. My husband simply wanted an easy life, and his avoidance of problems led to this, and Susan was no better. They jumped to conclusions about inheriting soon since my mother-in-law became dependent on care.
My house is no longer your home. Get out now. And don't you ever show your pathetic faces to me again.
My husband and Susan tried to resist several times, but when my mother-in-law made a motion to throw a nearby vase, they fled. Later, I handed the completed divorce papers to my husband and demanded alimony. But, rejected by the mistress for being a debtor, he was abandoned. The mistress fiercely resisted, saying she hated struggling with money. She tried to sweet-talk her way out of it, but even her mother sternly told her not to contact me. Due to these events, my husband's attitude changed drastically. He started dragging his feet on the divorce and suggested we try again. He sent me cringeworthy, poetic-like messages every day. It felt more like harassment, so I ignored them, and he turned to our daughter for sympathy. However, she knew everything that happened during the month he was gone. She had even come to help with my mother-in-law's care during her university break.
What are you talking about now? I don't want a father who runs from responsibilities, and cheating, that's just disgusting. Don't contact me again. Goodbye, creepy uncle. Being called a failure as a father and a creepy uncle by his daughter seemed to deeply shock my husband. He agreed to the divorce and alimony with a defeated look, muttering, "Maybe this will make my daughter forgive me." Reconciliation seems unlikely from a daughter's perspective. Despite wanting to appear a good father, my debt-ridden husband managed to gather enough money to pay the alimony in full. I'm sure he piled up more debt to do this, but it was entirely his doing. Not my concern anymore. After severing ties with my husband, the mistress's mother gave me a substantial sum of money as compensation. It was apparently all of the mistress's savings. She apologized again for her daughter's misdeeds, saying money couldn't solve everything. As for the mistress, she lied about being pregnant to get rid of my husband, who was drowning in debt. Desperate to break up, she confessed to making up the pregnancy as a shield against paying compensation. Her mother, beyond angry, was appalled. Disgusted at her daughter's disregard for life, she kicked her out penniless. The mistress, originally planning to return to her parents' home due to her depleted savings, was thrown off course. She sought her mother's help several times but remained unforgiven, reportedly spending nights at motels, with homelessness looming over her. Susan's actions were discovered by her husband, who was furious with her. Shortly after, his mother required care, and Susan ended up having to provide it at her in-laws' home. Overwhelmed within hours, she begged to be released, but her husband, knowing everything, refused. Consequently, Susan called me for help. Having had little to do with Susan since marrying her brother, I had thought everything was settled with my divorce. I had forgotten to block her number. After her wailing on the phone, I reflexively hung up and promptly blocked and deleted her number. Before moving to the facility, my mother-in-law gave me a diamond ring as a thank you. She said I could sell it if I wanted, as it was the only thing she had left. She didn't say much, but the ring had a large diamond, and it seemed valuable, something with significant memories since she hadn't sold it before. I could have refused, but I accepted it, feeling like she wanted me to have it. She told me to forget about her and start a new life. But I promised to keep visiting her. Not as a daughter-in-law, but as a friend. This made her smile warmly. She looked forward to it and entered the facility. Whenever I visit her at the facility, she introduces me as my daughter has come to visit. It warms my heart to be thought of as her daughter, and I've naturally started responding with "My mother is in your care." Seeing her more vibrant and lively than she ever was at her own home, I can't help but wish for her continued health and longevity.